Veterans of World War II joined the Queen for a service of remembrance marking the 70th anniversary of VE Day. Thousands gather in central London for a parade marking the end in 1945 of the war in Europe. Among those taking part, some of those who experienced 6 long years of conflict.
I was the only girl in the village who volunteered. There were 6 boys and myself, and 3 didn't come home, and 1 came home badly injured, and 3 of us survived unscathed.
We look back at one of the last major gatherings of the wartime generation. Also on tonight's programme, David Cameron says he has a lot on his plate after the Conservatives' election victory as he makes new cabinet appointments. The soul-searching for Labour, Lord Mandelson says Ed Miliband's approach ignored a vast swathe of the population.
A magnificent moment.
And Andy Murray wins the Madrid Open after beating Rafael Nadal. Good evening. Commemorations for the 70th anniversary of victory in Europe at the end of the Second World War have culminated with a parade in London and a service of thanksgiving. The Queen led the congregation at Westminster Abbey, where the Archbishop of Canterbury spoke of victory over the greatest darkness of the 20th century. Hundreds of surviving veterans were involved in the parade, as Nicholas Witchell reports on a day of remembrance.
A day of national thanksgiving for a victory, receding a little into history now, but undiminished in significance. For without this victory, there would have been no freedom. The commemoration was led within the ancient walls of Westminster Abbey by a monarch who remembers VE Day and who knows only too well the scale of her generation's sacrifice. The Queen placed her wreath at the grave of the unknown warrior. 70 years ago, she had appeared on VE Day on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with her father, King George VI, as the crowd celebrated victory in Europe. Today in Westminster Abbey, the Queen listened as words from her father's VE Day speech giving thanks for Britain's deliverance were recalled.
Speaking from our empire's oldest capital city, war battered but never
for one moment daunted or dismayed. Speaking from London, I ask you to join with me in that act of thanksgiving.
"70 years after the war in Europe ended, a single guardsman sounded the last post. At the Abbey's west door, the Queen met some of the veterans, members of a generation bonded by memories of a time when the United Kingdom and its allies stood against tyranny. And then in the spring sunshine, the veterans marched, to the acclamation of the crowds, through Parliament Square and up Whitehall, pausing to pay their respects at the cenotaph to those many friends who were lost. In the skies above, 2 Hurricanes and a Spitfire from the Battle of Britain memorial flight, adding their tribute to an indefatigable generation which has now grown old, but which, 70 years ago, would not be beaten. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, veterans across the country took part in the 70th anniversary commemorations. One who travelled to London was 89-year-old Barbara Wetherill from Selby in North Yorkshire. She was 17 when she joined the war effort. Our correspondent Daniela Relf has her story.
For Barbara Wetherill, today was always going to be something special. She was centre stage.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Well done.
Wherever she went, the crowds showed their appreciation.
All those people came out and lined the route just for us. I was very close to tears, although I was laughing and smiling and waving.
During the war, Barbara was an army driver. She wanted adventure, but the reality of war was a shock.
I was the only girl in the village who volunteered. There were 6 boys and myself, and 3 didn't come home, and 1 came home badly injured, and 3 of us survived unscathed. So it was quite a big price to pay for a small Dales village at that time.
She was in Sunderland on VE Day, still working as a driver, trying to get through the excitable crowds.
In the afternoon, when everybody was out celebrating in Sunderland, I had to take a truckload of rations through Sunderland to another battery, and it was absolute chaos.
At Westminster Abbey today, during the service of Thanksgiving, Barbara was one of 4 veterans chosen to meet the Queen. She shared today with her daughter Jane. At almost 90, she says this will probably be her last time at an event of this kind.
When you think of the millions who never came home, and then at the time you're hoping that all this sacrifice was worth it. I think the world's probably a better place, hopefully. You know, don't want it to be forgotten.
Daniela Ralph, BBC News, Westminster Abbey.
David Cameron has said he has a lot on his plate after the Conservatives' general election victory. Today he continued to shape his cabinet, confirming that Michael Gove will be the new Justice Secretary, replacing Chris Grayling, who becomes Leader of the House of Commons. Ian Duncan-Smith is to remain as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Our political correspondent Ben Wright reports.
So many different missions and ideas. Absorbing the stories of veterans after today's service. David Cameron was back on prime ministerial duties this weekend, assembling his new team, handing out the top jobs. It's a Conservative government now in charge, taking decisions on issues that will affect us all. George Osborne remains in charge of the money. An emergency budget is likely in June, with new spending cuts spelt out in the autumn. Ian Duncan-Smith will continue to run the Department for Work and Pensions, and one of his jobs will be to cut £12 billion from the benefits bill. The Education Secretary's loyalty has been rewarded, reappointed to her job. She spelt out the government's priorities.
Well, I think that what people wanted, what they voted for on Thursday, was very much a continuation of things like our economic reforms, making sure that we balance the books, but also delivery of some key manifesto commitments. Things obviously like a British Bill of Rights and an EU referendum.
And that will dominate the next 2 years. The Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, will have his work cut out. He, along with George Osborne, will lead the UK's renegotiation with Europe, and the task is huge: to convince European leaders to sign off concessions that will be put to a referendum by 2017. In the 1990s, John Major's government was torn apart over Europe, but today senior Conservatives said David Cameron could avoid the same fate.
I don't think we'll repeat the Major days for 3 reasons. 1, we've done it before, we know what it feels like. 2, people have got the option of talking to him more, I think, than before. And 3, if they don't like the outcome, they can actually campaign against it in a referendum.
Once a radical Education Secretary, Michael Gove has now gone to justice and will spearhead the scrapping of the Human Rights Act, so British court judgments cannot be overruled in Europe. Yesterday, Nicola Sturgeon showed off the 56 SNP MPs heading to Westminster. David Cameron has promised Scotland new powers, but today the SNP leader promised a fight.
What we will argue for is priority devolution of powers over business taxes, employment, the minimum wage, welfare, because these are the levers we need to grow our economy faster, to get more people into work, paying taxes and lifting people out of poverty.
MPs are back here from tomorrow and Tories will be buzzing. A majority of 12 is small, but more than any of them could have imagined. After 5 years sharing power with the Liberal Democrats, David Cameron is free to pursue the policies he wants and give jobs to who he wants. At the start of this new Parliament, the Prime Minister will enjoy his power. Back in Downing Street, Samantha Cameron seems to be enjoying the ride too. But on Europe in particular, the Prime Minister's party now expects him to deliver. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Meanwhile, the Liberal Democrats have announced that they will have a new leader before Parliament breaks up for the summer. That's after Nick Clegg announced his resignation on Friday. The party only retained 8 seats, but it has since had an unexpected boost of 5,000 new members. Nominations open on Wednesday. One of the main architects of Labour's victories under Tony Blair has attacked the approach taken by Ed Miliband, saying the party now faces a challenge similar in scale to that of the 1980s. His comments come as the Shadow Health Minister Liz Kendall became the first to declare that she would run for the leadership. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, James Landale.
In the numb aftermath of defeat, Labour's beginning to ask how one day it could win control of this building once again. Today, a clutch of potential leaders from the party's centre-right gathered before the cameras with a simple pitch. Labour must once again appeal to the aspirational middle classes. A message once delivered by this man, who was brutal in his analysis. The party had made a terrible mistake in discarding New Labour, leading to a defeat the like of which it hadn't seen since the 1980s.
We were sort of sent out and told to sort of wave our fists, angrily at the nasty Tories, and wait for the public to realise how much they had missed us. Well, they weren't missing us, and they didn't miss us.
One potential leadership candidate admitted Labour had run too large a deficit before the crash and said the party had to appeal to wealth creators.
We can't have a message that says anybody is too rich or too poor to be part of our party. What the Labour Party does well is build a big tent of people of different backgrounds, creeds, colours, races, religions, economic circumstances.
2 different generations with a similar message, and they weren't alone.
We failed to appeal to aspirational communities across the country, but we also lost the support of traditional Labour communities who did not feel that the Labour Party was speaking to their values.
The one contender who's openly declared she wants to be leader said the party had to be more positive and less like a man in a pub who moans but is ignored.
We didn't build a broad enough coalition of voters in different parts of the country, and we didn't set out a positive enough alternative for the future. It's not enough to just critique what's going under this government, but actually you've got to set out something that people can believe in.
And even those who sat in the last Labour cabinet were out testing the water.
We've got to make sure we learn the lessons from what is a really bad defeat for us, where we've lost votes, whether that's in the market towns in Middle England or whether that is in our Scottish cities and industrial heartlands. And we've got to win those votes back, be championing both aspirations and fairness for the future.
This is just the start of a long debate that Labour's going to have about its future here at its headquarters and around the country. And appealing to the aspirational middle classes is just one point of view. Others on the left think the party has to do something fundamentally different if it's to appeal to those who backed the SNP in Scotland and UKIP in the north of England. Labour MPs will gather here tomorrow and party chiefs will meet later in the week. Their first task, to decide to elect a new leader quickly or wait till the autumn. James Landale, BBC News, Westminster.
And we can join James now live in Westminster. So how much do we already know about the Labour leadership contest, James?
Well, not a great deal. We don't know the precise timing yet. That's still to be decided. What we do know tonight is that one of the potential contenders has already dropped out. The MP for Barnsley Central, Dan Jarvis, was being urged by many of his colleagues to stand. They thought he was the man who would help the party reconnect with the public. He's a former major in the Parachute Regiment. He served with distinction in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's highly regarded, full of ideas for Labour's future. But he's announced tonight that he's not going to be standing, saying it's not the right time for his family, which I think will disappoint some in Labour, just as it might please some in Conservative ranks who thought that he could well pose a threat to the Conservatives. As for those Conservative ranks, those MPs, they are meeting here at Westminster tomorrow. They are going to be addressed by the Prime Minister, setting the tone for what I think will be a crucial relationship over the next 5 years in this Parliament when the government has such a small majority, and those MPs could potentially cause the Prime Minister so much trouble. As for the Prime Minister, tomorrow he will complete, I'm told, his cabinet reshuffle. Tomorrow I think we're going to see change. We're going to see some younger faces in the cabinet, more female faces in the cabinet, taking jobs which used to belong, some of them, to the Liberal Democrats, that will now be taken by Conservatives.
James Landale at Westminster, thank you. Well, on that subject of David Cameron, he's already been making calls to European leaders about Britain's membership of the EU. Let's join our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who's in Brussels. How's this process going to work, Katya?
Well, it is early days, of course, and I've been told those calls the Prime Minister had with EU leaders have been rather general, saying that the EU is a subject that must be spoken about soon. This Tuesday should be interesting, though. George Osborne comes here to Brussels for a meeting of EU finance ministers. He's been named the Prime Minister's chief negotiator on Europe, so you can expect him to be mobbed by EU colleagues in a friendly way, of course, but they want to know what concrete requests the UK has. It's felt here that up till now David Cameron has been rather vague. He will have to work fast if he wants to achieve significant EU change and hold a referendum by the end of 2017. He may come under pressure to work even faster at home and abroad. EU powers Germany and France hold their own key elections in 2017, and their governments worry about the rising popularity of Eurosceptic parties like France's National Front. They fear if Britain leaves the EU or gets its own New Deal just as their populations go to the poll, that could give even more power to the Eurosceptics. So they'll want the British question, if you like, to be settled sooner rather than later.
Kasia Adler in Brussels, thank you very much. It's being reported that a man recently arrested after a woman's parachute failed to open during a skydive in Wiltshire is her husband. Victoria Cilliers, seen here with her husband Emile, suffered multiple injuries when both her main and her reserve parachutes malfunctioned during a solo jump on Salisbury Plain. It's now emerged that her husband, who is an instructor, was questioned by police after they were alerted to the possibility that the parachutes were sabotaged. Time now for the sport. Let's join Karthi Nanyasegaram at the BBC Sports Centre. Karthi.
Good evening. Andy Murray is the Madrid Masters champion after beating Rafael Nadal on clay for the first time. It's Murray's second successive clay court title. He won a tournament on the surface for the first time just 6 days ago. Patrick Geary reports.
Rafael Nadal's kingdom is built on clay. So on his home surface in his home country, his authority is absolute. 6 times Andy Murray's played him on clay, 6 times he's lost, and yet the first 3 games here were all Murray's. He'd only won his first title on this surface on Monday, yet here was the upstart challenging the king, even daring to beat him. First set, remarkably Murray's. The world number 3 played on Spanish clay as a teenager training in Barcelona, but never has he shown such mastery of the surface, judging his shots perfectly. From whichever angle you looked at it, Murray was the aggressor, taking the game to the Spaniard whenever possible. He broke twice in the second set. This simply doesn't happen to Nadal, who's won this tournament 4 times, but was swept away in straight sets. Since his wedding last month, Murray's form has surged. Traditionally, he's struggled on clay, so what's changed? Well, in his own words, marriage works. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
It's time to pop out of the room if you're waiting to watch Match of the Day 2 or Sports Scene, which follow us soon on BBC One. The Premier League's top and bottom teams were in action today, but Queen's Park Rangers only have 2 games left in the top flight after they were relegated to the Championship with a 6-0 thrashing from Manchester City, while champions Chelsea drew 1-1 with Liverpool in their first home game since winning the title. Like Chelsea, Scottish champions Celtic were given a guard of honour today when they faced the side in second place in the Premiership, Aberdeen. The Celtic captain Scott Brown scored the only goal of the game as they extended their lead at the top of the table to 14 points. A stunning goal from Jermaine Beckford sealed Preston's place in the League One playoff final after a 3-0 win in the second leg of their semi-final against Chesterfield. Beckford scored from around the halfway line to give Preston their 3rd goal on the day, his 2nd. They were 4-0 aggregate winners. But police are investigating claims that the Chesterfield captain Ian Evatt was punched and kicked during a post-match pitch invasion. Formula One and the Mercedes driver Nico Rosberg has won the Spanish Grand Prix, his first victory of the season. Rosberg beat his teammate Lewis Hamilton to the checkered flag by 17 seconds. The German is now 20 points behind Hamilton in the championship standings, while Sebastian Vettel finished in 3rd place today. The tussle for the final 2 playoff places will go down to the last weekend of the regular Rugby Union Premiership season after Exeter Chiefs beat Saracens today by 24 points to 20. Exeter, who are aiming to qualify for the playoffs for the first time in their history, moved above Saracens into 4th place with a win that included 2 tries from Thomas Waldron. And that's all from the BBC Sports Centre for now, Michelle.
Karthi, thank you. It's been a key evening in the British show business calendar, with the BAFTA Television Awards taking place in London. The awards celebrated performances in front of the camera and the very best behind-the-scenes talent. Our entertainment correspondent Lizo Mazimba was on the red carpet.
Some of the biggest stars of the small screen were out on the red carpet for a night honouring the very best TV. Tonight isn't necessarily about which shows or performers are the most popular, it's about which are judged to be of the highest quality by the industry. And such recognition from their peers is of huge importance to the nominees and particularly to the winners.
Anything that I have said to the police.
The lost honour of Christopher Jeffries, the true story of how a retired teacher became engulfed in a news frenzy after being arrested for a murder he hadn't committed, won 2 awards, Best Miniseries and Best Actor for Jason Watkins.
It's a brilliant script and it's about real events and real people and things that happened that are relevant, and it tells a story beyond just a thriller tale or a kind of a particular genre. It tells of real events.
Tell the boss Nello's here.
Also winning 2 awards, Marvellous, another true story about the extraordinary life of a man called Neil Baldwin. It won Best Single Drama and Best Supporting Actress for Gemma Jones.
What happens is,
Jessica Hines won her first BAFTA, taking Best Female Comedy Performance for her role in BBC satire W1A.
If you're worried that there's such a thing as
Veteran broadcaster Clive James couldn't attend the ceremony, but he was presented with a special award recognising his huge contribution to TV. Lizo Mazimba, BBC News at the TV BAFTAs.
Just before we go, a quick look at some of the main stories coming up this week. Tomorrow, all 56 of the newly elected SNP MPs will travel to Westminster. Nicola Sturgeon has said they will be the principal opposition to David Cameron and the Conservatives. On Tuesday, Greece is due to make a large debt repayment to the International Monetary Fund. A gathering of Eurozone finance ministers tomorrow will have Greece's economic reforms at the top of their agenda. And on Wednesday, the latest employment figures will be released. They are expected to show a continued fall in the number of people out of work. That's all from us on BBC One now. It is time for the news wherever you are. From all of us, good night.